Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is Fang. Subscribe here wherever you get your podcasts and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Karine Jean-Pierre might have the worst job in Washington this week. She is on tape over and over again, at least 6 times since 2023, denying President Biden would pardon his son Hunter Biden, which of course officially happened the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Biden himself denied that the pardon would be given, and now the backlash is building as business resumes here in D.C. and people ask these questions. In a Monday gaggle with reporters on Air Force One, as Joe Biden headed to Africa, Karine Jean-Pierre was asked to explain the discrepancy between what the White House said and then what ultimately happened. Here's how that went.
I wanted to ask you, could those statements now be seen as lies from the American people? Is there really a credibility issue here given now this announcement?
First of all, one of the things that the president always believes is to be truthful to the American people. That is something that he always truly believes. He came to this decision this weekend, so let's be very clear about that. He says it himself.
The entire Hunter Biden saga is extremely complicated, in no small part because he left his laptop at a repair shop in Delaware, so the sheer amount of information about Hunter Biden's personal life and lobbying efforts is overwhelming, and it leads down many dark roads involving many different and possible crimes and misdeeds. Broadly, there are the crimes themselves, there's the cover-up, and then there's the censorship. The cover-up and the censorship implicate Biden allies everywhere from the IRS to the CIA and the FBI. The crimes, though, are what President Biden just waved off, and what even Aaron Blake at the Washington Post referred to as, quote, extraordinary breadth in a pardon on Monday. A jury convicted Hunter Biden in June on 3 felony gun charges for illegally purchasing and owning a gun while using drugs 6 years ago in 2018. He pleaded guilty in September to 9 counts of tax crimes, 3 of which were felony charges. Sentencing in both cases was scheduled for later in December. The presidential pardon didn't just cover those cases, but all, quote, offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1, 2014 through December 1, 2024. Aaron Blake wrote Monday in the Washington Post, quote, experts say there is little to no precedent for such a pardon covering such a wide range of activity over such a long period, with the closest being Gerald Ford's 1974 pardon of Richard M. Nixon after Nixon resigned post-Watergate. A longtime staffer of the DOJ's pardon office told Blake that Biden's pardon, quote, isn't tied to any special counsel investigation or charging document, and the only pardon grant that comes Ford's pardon of Nixon for any crimes he may have committed from 1969 to 1974, which on its face would have included crimes, if any, unrelated to Watergate. Blake notes that Gerald Ford's Watergate pardon included a time period that is half as long as Hunter Biden's nearly 11-year time period. And as GW law professor Jonathan Turley points out, Ford was not pardoning Nixon for any criminal acts that implicated Ford significantly. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is repeatedly implicated in Hunter Biden's wrongdoing, given that the entire lobbying operation in question was about influence peddling, about Hunter Biden selling access to Joe as vice president and potential future president. So Joe Biden falsely claimed to have no knowledge of all of this, and the laptop ultimately showed him interfacing with Hunter Biden's clients and also having expenses covered by Hunter Biden. Fang, independent journalist and contributing editor with us at Unheard, made a critical observation on Monday. Looking at the 11-year pardon window, Fang notes, quote, the dates line up almost with the beginning of Hunter's stint as a Ukrainian energy firm Burisma board member, a gig that paid him about $1 million per year. He began negotiating for the position in the spring of 2014, and the official announcement was unveiled in May of that year. As I've previously reported, Lee wrote, emails show that almost as soon as he joined the firm, he began discussing plans to influence the Obama administration's State Department. Lee added, news reports last year revealed that Department of Justice investigators were probing foreign agent registration charges against Hunter over his business dealings with Chinese and Ukrainian officials. No charges were made, however. Now, Any FARA-related inquiry would face statute of limitation issues, though Hunter Biden's involvement in forest business dealings is unclear. He did not leave Burisma until 2019 and continued working with a Chinese private investment firm up through his father's presidential race, Lee finished. FARA is a personal hobby horse of mine because it's such a fascinating window into how Washington operates. You can go to FARA.gov at any point and pull these registrations up. Paul Manafort went to prison in part because he violated FARA by failing to disclose his work in a scheme that was helping Ukraine's Party of Regions, along with Democratic lobbyist Tony Podesta. Ken Vogel over the New York Times made a similar observation to Lee, posting, quote, "The date range listed on Hunter Biden's pardon is also a tell that it was intended to preclude Trump's DOJ from bringing a FARA charge." Remember, this is going to be the Retribution administration. Peter Schweitzer wrote, "Look for Jim Biden to be pardoned next." Remember, the family was still under investigation under FARA as the pardon comes down. Might have implicated Joe. That's what Peter said. So there's now no point in charging Hunter Biden with FARA violations because of this blanket pardon, even if the DOJ hadn't slow-walked beyond the statute of limitations, which also means Hunter Biden's unregistered quote-unquote agent status won't be probed in a court of law and potentially reveal more about his father's involvement. It also sets precedent for Biden to more easily pardon other family members, as Peter noted, in the next few weeks. So at this point, it is pretty clear that Joe Biden knew his son peddled access to him around the world, from Beijing to Kiev. That was pretty clear before the election, as was the president and his son's dishonesty about the entire business. So I don't think the pardon is a game changer on that front. But I do think the political and media conversation surrounding it should be much clearer about what happened here. This was a historically unprecedented pardon that will not only protect Hunter Biden from future legal exposure, but the president from future moral exposure. So I'm very happy to say Lee Fang is actually here with us now to break down exactly what this pardon will mean for the Biden family. And Lee has been covering this story, Hunter Biden, for years before anyone was really paying attention to it. So Lee Fang, thank you for being here. Lee Fang, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so I have a question just about what might have happened even before this pardon, because it's very relevant to the president's thinking about the pardon, obviously. Do you think that Hunter Biden was likely to ever be charged with a Foreign Agents Registration Act violation, period? He hadn't been yet. You had reporting from guys like Ken Vogel that were pretty clearly showing, or that was pretty clearly showing, that there were grounds for charges to be brought, and yet nothing came year after year. So would it ever have happened?
It's not clear. There are a couple kind of technical legal issues that might have been a stumbling block. You know, the Foreign Agent Registration Act is the nation's oldest lobby disclosure law. It was passed in the 1930s, designed to prevent Nazi agents from distributing propaganda. You know, back in the mid-30s, the Germans were kind of attempting to influence newspapers and Capitol Hill debate as they were kind of preparing for war. But the law has really expanded over the years. It's very broad. You know, any kind of individual who is not just paid, but acting in direction from a foreign interest to influence public opinion or public policy is required to disclose under this law. That being said, we haven't seen much enforcement of it until 2017, when there were questions around Russian and Ukrainian influence in the Trump 2016 campaign. And now the DOJ has taken more of an interest in this law. But there is a statute of limitations 5 years after the first offense. It's just not clear where the kind of timeline lines up. Hunter Biden left his main foreign entanglements in 2019 and 2020 as his father was running for president, and there were more and more questions about these relationships. In 2019, you know, he left the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian natural gas and energy company, from the board position that paid him about $1 million a year. I believe officially in 2020 or in the end of 2019, he left Bohai Harvest, the Chinese investment fund where he was acting as an advisor and in terms of making venture capital deals within China. So, you know, the timing doesn't perfectly sync. You know, even if the Trump administration, the very first thing they did, coming into the office in January was filing a FARA charge, that 5-year statute of limitations, they would have some issues. But perhaps there are other lobbying-related charges they could have brought, Lobbying Disclosure Act or other statutes. It's just it's interesting to kind of probe. We don't know the exact thinking. We know that from other reporting that the Department of Justice had looked at potential charges. It seems very clear this was a politicized environment. We also know that some of the firms that were working for Hunter Biden, working for Hunter's employers at the Ukrainian company Burisma, they retroactively disclosed under FARA, realizing that they had violated the rules. Like this one firm, Blue Star Strategies, that he had actually recommended that that his employers hire to deal with some of this energy Ukraine lobbying work. They retroactively filed under FARA. It doesn't make sense that, if he was coordinating all these different lobbying firms, he was working with a number of individuals, lobbyists, lawyers. He was kind of the go-between. He was helping suggest who to hire, coordinating these efforts. As we know from newly disclosed records, he was directly contacting the State Department. He was doing a lot of government affairs and lobbying work. Maybe he found some kind of technical exemption, but the abundance of evidence shows that he was lobbying. Whether the Trump administration would pursue those charges under FARA or others, it's not clear, though.
Lee, I'm going to ask a really dumb question, but I think it's one worth asking, which is basically just why is all of this bad? I think you and I agree that it is bad. This is sort of an ethically dubious area, but if people are listening and they're thinking, okay, so what? His dad was vice president, maybe president in the future. If you're a public servant for a lot of your life, you're not really raking in as much money as many of your billionaire donors, and he's got a family to support, et cetera, et cetera. So when we're just stepping back and looking at the breadth of Hunter Biden's lobbying career, James Biden, Frank Biden, Valerie Biden, why should we care about any of this?
That's a great question. I think it gets at the heart of all of this because it's clouded by a lot of BS. It's clouded by a lot of partisanship and polarization. Obviously, there are folks on the right, Republicans, who have weaponized this issue to gain political benefit, to help with the presidential election this year when they thought that Joe Biden would be the nominee. And there are some cruel parts of this, too. I've reported on the Hunter Biden saga for the better part of 10 years. When I had a small blog back in 2014, I reported on Hunter Biden being hired by a Ukrainian natural gas firm, just as I was reporting on Republicans and Democrats alike who had strange ties to the natural gas industry that seemed to be hired to peddle influence. And now,
which
more recently,
nobody was paying attention to in 2014. Like, you were one of a handful.
I'm definitely tooting my own horn here, but yeah,
but it's true.
I reported on it then, and since the issues around the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop, and then the revelations within the Hunter Biden laptop, really, I deplore the kind of focus on the sexual and mental health issues of Hunter Biden. There is a serious public interest issue around him using access to his father and other government officials to engage in unregistered lobbying. You kind of have to separate what is an actual public interest issue here versus what is partisan spin, what is just cruelty in terms of, Hunter Biden did struggle through a trauma after his brother died, and he kind of descended into what looked like a manic episode with addiction issues and other issues. And it's just a human tragedy. But at the same time, you have the values and the beliefs of the Democratic Party and just the American system more broadly, that everyone has to play by the same rules. We don't have a two-tier government. If you're the son or brother of a powerful government official or a billionaire or some special interest, you get a different level of, you engage in a different justice system than everyone else. The appearance of conflict of interest is very important. It really kind of it's what binds our big and expansive country together. How do we have rule of law? We all can't play by the same rules. It's kind of fundamental to the democratic project. If that starts fading, like, what separates us from a tin pot dictatorship or a banana republic where there is a two-tiered system of government? So just in terms of upholding the rules of the road, and making sure that our government officials play by the same rules that the citizenship that they rule over have to abide by. I think that's very important. For the Democratic Party, more in a more particular sense, they've made many arguments about an assortment of Republican characters, but most prominently Trump and his allegations around special preferences for his family and potential quid pro quo or conflict of interest issues. The Democrats don't really have a stool to sit on when they are making these accusations if they're engaging in the exact same type of activity. I think there is just kind of a consistency issue too for Democrats. So it's complicated. There's the father-son aspect that I think anyone can have sympathy for, but there's a bigger kind of question around rule of law and a consistency of values, and really separating, okay, there is a human tragedy here that we can all have empathy for in terms of the addiction, but then there's a whole separate issue around lobbying and peddling influence, and potentially a president that was using his son to gain financial rewards through foreign clients.
Well, and another thing I think on that note that you've covered really well is this does sometimes shape policy. I mean, sometimes lobbyists will take clients that they naturally agree with, cigarettes. There's some people who are still attached to their cigarettes, so I know we'll go and lobby for big tobacco to this day because they have this ideological commitment to big tobacco. You should have the freedom to smoke, etc. But that's not always the case. Sometimes this access to power that you're able to purchase as an oligarch in, say, Ukraine does shape the policy of the United States government. And when it comes to Hunter Biden, we know, this is just off the top of my head, there's Romania, Mexico, China, Ukraine. Some of this we know this from the laptop. Some of it we know from public reporting. But he has had extensive clients around the world, and it's probably pretty fair to wonder, Lee, to what extent that actually shaped the Obama administration's policy. We know that there were lobbying efforts made during some of this time period by Hunter Biden. You talked about Burisma back in 2014, and Joe Biden famously says that he told Hunter, "I hope you know what you're doing." So it also, I would imagine, we can see the fingerprints of some of this on policy over the years.
Yeah, I think that's right. You could make an argument around some deferential policies towards China in particular, and potentially also with Ukraine. And there's a question, as you raised, around was there a preconceived interest or ideological alignment? Or was this simply a quid pro quo to gain policy favor, for foreign interests, where there wasn't a pre-existing belief system? So, to take your cigarette analogy, Hunter Biden worked as a credit card lobbyist and then worked as a lobbyist for higher education companies and universities. He served on the Amtrak board. There was no experience in terms of natural gas or Ukraine issues prior to him being hired in 2014. He had no experience as a venture capitalist or a private equity executive investing in Chinese startups. The Chinese government and some of their backed entities like this private equity fund, the Bohai Harvest Fund, brought him in 2014 as an investment advisor. It does raise kind of obvious questions. Why did they choose him? There are thousands upon thousands of investment professionals who work in these areas around technology investing or in energy investing that they could have gone to, but they happened to go to at the time the vice president's son. So it doesn't, it seems like it raises very clear conflict of interest issues.
Yeah. Would it be unusual for Hunter Biden? I guess we were talking about the statute of limitations and all of that, very relevant. But even just overall, would it be unusual for him to escape FARA charges during the time period, even let's use the 5-year statute of limitations, given that you mentioned this post-2017, post-Manafort, Podesta crackdown that had K Street at least temporarily bracing for more enforcement. So in that atmosphere, which was very real, at least for the time, is it kind of odd that there were no FARA charges on Hunter Biden?
Yeah, it is a little bit odd, but Ken Vogel, who's done some of the best work on this, he had filed a Freedom of Information Act request for simple emails between Hunter Biden and State Department officials. That's not like it's it's rocket science. It's not like, oh, it's too hard to find that email. It's going to take 6 or 7 years to find an email. It's the government has the equivalent of a Google search. They can do a search within their internal emails and find it within seconds. Why did it take something like 7 or 8 years for the government to produce those records? And why they did not produce those records until August 2024, this year, over a month after Biden drops out of the race? I mean, this is a politicized environment. It's very clear that the government took its own discretionary powers not to prioritize Hunter Biden, and it's certainly not when over the last 4 years with Biden as the president.
And just another step back kind of question, since this is a big picture scope, given Joe Biden's potential involvement, we've talked about, and you have followed this very closely, Joe Biden going to Cafe Milano at meetings where they're partners of Hunter Biden. There are also other members of the Biden family who have engaged in this sort of stuff domestically and beyond for a long time. What do we know about, basically, without reading the full book on this, Lee, but what do we know about how the Biden family has sort of seen this as a crucial part of their business going back to Joe Biden's days in the Senate? This is kind of just what they've done, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the strongest defense that you could muster, I believe, for the Biden family is that they were careful around quid pro quo. What seems to be the case from witnesses and people who were there and from the Biden laptop is that sometimes Hunter Biden might have exaggerated his influence with his own father, that he would kind of bring in foreign dignitaries and other clients that were attempting to influence policy. And then he would, put his father on speakerphone and ask him about fishing and other things, and kind of bragged to his clients that, he's got anytime he wants, he can call the vice president or, call Joe Biden. And he would kind of demonstrate that he has this extreme level of access. And it's the same type of thing that Joe Biden's brother James seems to have done, and other members of the Biden family kind of touting their influence with Joe Biden. But then there is limited evidence that they would then ask, at least explicitly in front of their clients, for a quid pro quo, like, therefore we're going to get this favor done, therefore we're going to get this policy changed. There was like a very kind of well calibrated song and dance used to entice foreign dignitaries or foreign clients in order to earn these like multi-million-dollar paydays. I mean, he was getting a lot of money from these Ukrainian and Chinese interests in particular. Still questioned over how the influence resulted in concrete changes in government policy. But you look at the Hunter Biden emails and his text messages, the one asterisk is that, maybe he was high or in a manic period, because, you look at the messages, they're not typed out like a serious adult. It seems like someone who is in a exasperated state of mind. But they're basically complaining and saying, look, I'm using the money that I'm doing through my business, i.e. lobbying for foreign interests, to pay for all the family debts and to pay for the upgrades to the house and pay for everyone's rent. So it's clear that, as much as the Biden family has tried to create the appearance of a firewall, that Hunter was doing his own thing, completely separate from Joe Biden and the rest of the family, it seems very clear he was commingling his funds and helping to help finance certain efforts and, lifestyle aspects for other Biden family members, including the president.
Yeah, that is a really important point. And Lee, I want to wrap just by talking about the potential precedent here. There have been a lot of comparisons to the Gerald Ford's pardoning of Richard Nixon for anything that had happened during this. It was like a 5-year period related to Watergate. And there's Aaron Blake has gone back to like Andrew Johnson and Confederate soldiers and Benjamin Harrison and polygamous Mormons. But Donald Trump, actually, I'm now just putting this together. Michael Flynn was facing FARA violations, and Donald Trump ended up pardoning Michael Flynn. But just more broadly, Jared Kushner could potentially end up wrapped up in some of this. Obviously, he's running a fund. I'm sure he's doing it very carefully, but he's running a fund with Saudi money right now. There are other people in Trump's orbits that Tom Barrack that had faced similar things like this. So in the future, I mean, this blanket pardon that is not tied to any specific offense over a almost 11-year time period, Could that influence the way people in the future who are related to presidents or in the orbit of presidents go about their business during any given president's time in office?
Yes. I mean, it just seems like this is going to escalate. And look, I'm kind of learning something just in the last 24 hours. There's actually no federal law that requires a centralized database of pardons. It's kind of like it's here and there reported in different ways, mostly through the press and through like presidential announcements. Like it would just, I think we would all benefit from a better understanding of how this kind of has progressed throughout time. Like a lot of norms in our politics, like, you look back in the early 90s, it wasn't really until Reagan and HW retired from office, and the norm was created that presidents go out and do these $1 million speaking gigs. It just hadn't been done in the 20th century before, and there was a bit of an outcry, and then it just got normalized. Then, of course, Clinton went out and did that. Obama went out and did that. Bush has done that. That's just kind of the way we do business. These things kind of just, there's a sudden fissure and then a period of normalization. And then it becomes an expectation that future presidents give out these blanket pardons. As I'm sure a lot of your listeners and viewers have seen in the last few hours, this Biden pardon is sweeping. It's any committed or, may have committed crimes over 11-year period. For most of the other presidential pardons, Democrat and Republican, it's for particular crimes. And then for a very particular period. And that's an 11-year period over anything he may have committed is incredibly broad, and maybe this is going to become the new norm for both Democrats and Republicans.
Lee Fang, this has been so interesting. I don't know how you keep track of all of the particulars in this wild world of lobbying and foreign influence peddling. So thank you for breaking it down for us today.
Always great to join you, Emily. Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's edition of Undercurrents. As a reminder, we are here every single day, weekdays, Monday through Friday. We are here. So subscribe to the Undercurrents channel, subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. And of course, over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show.